Billy, welcome to the Guild of Dads podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, an absolute pleasure. I reached out to you because I grabbed a copy of your book recently, We Need to Hang Out, and it really kind of resonated with me being a 42-year-old father of two. And as I said to you before we came on air, a lot of the stuff that you were talking about and there really kind of did make me laugh as I was listening to it because it was just kind of very, very relatable. I know there's a story about how the book actually came about in the first place, and anyone listening to the way you kind of record it in your book will chuckle to themselves. But what did your editor actually say to you on that fateful day?
Yeah, so I got conned into an editor's office with one of the oldest lies in journalism, which is that we have a story you'd be perfect for. And I mean, that line does something to your ego. And so here I am sauntering down to this editor's office thinking, like, what about me stood out amongst all these potential journalists? And I go to the office, I sit down, he looks across the desk at me, and he said, I want you to write about how middle-aged men have no friends. And I mean, in that moment, an existential crisis is going on in my head. And while I'm going through sort of the classic fight or flight moment, am I going to argue with this guy? Am I going to start crying and run out the door? He's rattling off all these reasons why he wants me to do this big article, which is because there's this loneliness epidemic going on, which was news to me, and also that it had these dire consequences for not just our mental health, but our physical health. And so, in just a short period of time sitting in this office, like a lot of things are thrown at me. And, naturally, I walk back to my desk and my only goal is to talk my way out of this. In my head, I'm just trying to figure out why I am not perfect for this story. And I mean, where I started was the truth. I'm not someone that didn't have friends. I have great friends. But as I started going through that list of great friends in my head, it's like, oh, I haven't seen that guy in a couple months. Like, and I haven't seen that person in years. Like all of a sudden it became, that word to use, relatable. All of a sudden I start relating to this thing. And by the time I sit down at my desk in the center of the newsroom, I was like, oh, I am perfect for this story. And it wasn't because I was unique or special in any way. It was because I was wildly typical.
Mm. And did you find
And
that
so,
did you find that was a bit of like a shock to the system then when that first sort of initial shock subsided? You actually think actually he's got a point here.
yeah, I mean, it was like, am I lonely? Like it's the sort of thing you don't want to allow yourself to think about. And I never felt lonely, but loneliness is I never would have described myself as lonely, but there were things where like the social connections I wished to have were not meeting up with my reality. So, I kind of, sit there wallowing in pity for myself for a little bit. And then I agree to take on the assignment and I start reading into this topic, and it was shocking. It was staggering. It was like, I mean, basically painting a picture that the average person, which I'm fairly average, right? The average person was suffering from high loneliness. And that had, I mean, the concept, every single thing you don't want to have in your life, cancer, diabetes, heart disease, all that, like dying, dramatically increased by being lonely, even living alone, feelings of isolation, anything in that broad category. And I heard something the other day. I was on a panel with a couple doctors, and one of them said that there's a new study out saying that people who are sedentary but have a robust social circle are healthier than people who work out all the time but have no friends. It was like these things still. I mean, I've read study after study. The data is there. It still seems implausible to me. But so as I'm going through this, the research for this magazine article, I'm doing what I always do, which is I'm being a little selfish. It's like, how does this work for me? Like, and how can I use this to change myself? And so initially I wrote this article. I raised my hand in the article and said, darn it, this is me. I've become a little bit of a loser, and I didn't even notice it was happening, which was just as sad. I'm someone who feels very fortunate. I have a job, I have kind of my dream job. I've got a great wife. I've got kids. I've got a home. I've got a lot going for me. But at the end of the day, like friendship was not a part of my daily life. It was something that I did when the important stuff was over, and the important stuff is never over. And if I was guilty of anything, it was in not thinking of friendship as one of the important things.
And and you mentioned, it's interesting, because we were talking off air about Robin Dunbar. Now, I had the pleasure of speaking to him a few months back, and one of the things that he said was just exactly what you've just said to me about this study that on this panel that you've just that you were appearing on. Because what he said to me was that because I suggested to him that the conversation seems to be moving away from diet and lifestyle more towards connections now, in terms of longevity and indicators of chronic illness and this kind of stuff. And he said exactly the same thing as you just said to me, that there's the studies that they're doing more recently that actually, in actual fact, you could take someone that is actually not in very good shape and actually help them to kind of gain connections and stuff and have more and deeper relationships and fulfilling relationships and have a community around them. And in actual fact, all the predictors and markers for longevity and stuff, they begin to improve. And you touch upon the blue zones in your book as well, don't you? Where all the centenarians are living in all over the world. So
yeah, and I'll say England is considered kind of a world leader in at least acknowledging that the health connections to friendship, especially you're working hard on the seniors, the pensioners, I think you call them. But the idea that, like, if you don't want to see the doctor, see your friends, still feels like odd to say, right? Like, I mean, we believe that if we exercise and eat our broccoli and, get our 8 hours of sleep, that it'll have positive effects. But it still seems like I'm doing the rounds talking about this, and I feel like a snake oil salesman when I'm like looking at people and saying, if you want to live a happy, healthy, long life, as these blue zones have proven, like, what you need to do is not just have friends, but a way to be friends with your friends, and to have friendship built into the daily calendar, to really have sort of an active membership in a tribe. And one of the challenges in middle age, in adulthood, is like, how, so I wrote this article, and it became like the most viral thing ever published by my newspaper. It was bananas. It was, they were going to give me an intern to answer my emails. I'm getting emails by the thousands from all over the world. An article about how men are lonely. It ends up becoming like the most popular article, like, in the history of our website. Like, it was nuts. And the thing that I started to recognize in all these responses was that no one was challenging me on this being a problem. It was no one was saying this isn't a cancer. What everybody was asking was like, well, what's the cure? In the strangest possible way, like, it's a simple answer: friendship, right? You need friends. That's what you need. You need active friendships. To actually execute that is what, it's why I wrote a long book. It's like, oh my gosh, was this a drama? So I set out to, selfishly cure myself. And it was so far from simple. And I mean, my first reaction when I find out that I'm now, like, killing myself by not having any friends, I was like, all right, I've got to get the band back together, right? Like, I got to get my old squads, and we got to reconnect, and we got to hang out. And I did. And that was fun. I did a lot of sort of gimmicky things, trying to reunite some classmates. And it got to a certain point where I realized that, like, however great that was, that still wasn't changing the fact that I didn't have anyone to hang out with on a Wednesday night. And I'm part of an increasingly prevalent problem in the modern world, which is that I don't live where I grew up. I'm only about an hour away, but I'm in an entirely new ecosystem. So I came here to raise a family, the proverbial sort of, great community for young kids. But it was like, well, where do I fit in? Am I just hoping that I'll make a connection with another dad on the sideline at the soccer game, or is that just how it goes? Am I just biding time until we all retire and reconnect on the golf course? So it was, it required me to think, all right, if I am going to really solve this problem for me and reap the health benefits, I need to build a new squad. I need to start a new band. And that's like so awkward. It's so like to set out in that, like when someone's coming on really strong, trying to be a friend, it's like, it gets a little icky. Right. And so I'm trying to walk this tightrope, and it was, it's the story of the book, basically the story told in the book, but it was, it ultimately became this thing where I think, to go back to this sort of arc of this story, initially I was like trying to make my best friendships from the past like relevant again. And I made them stronger than they've been in years. But what I ultimately came to realize was I needed new best friends. And that's a weird topic, because I think most people, and we know this from surveys, most people, when they think of that idea, that word, that phrase, best friend, you're thinking of someone you go way back with, right? You went to school with, there, maybe, you grew up with, maybe there's a cutoff after university, right? But the idea of making new best friends as an adult, it's kind of considered like not a real thing. But then I heard this joke, this offhand line from Mindy Kaling, this actress, on her like sitcom television show. She says, a best friend is not a person, it's a tier. And there was something about that was liberating. It was like, okay, I'm not insulting my best friends of the past by trying to add new best friends in the present. And there were some guys that I knew who I like felt that spark with. That it's that's kind of usually a term used in romantic relationships. And, I address in the book this fear that men have of coming across as gay or having that word thrown at them. Right. But like, there were men I felt a spark with, I felt a connection to, an attraction to, for lack of a better word. And it was like, all right, I need to try and convert these people from the guys that I say, hey, we should get a beer sometime with, to actual day-to-day friends, and so to do that, I apologize here. I'm doing all the talking and you're nodding, so I feel like I should keep rolling. But to do that, I used the science to kind of hack relationships. And the one thing about the science of connection that stands out the most to me is how there's a fundamental difference in the ways that men and women interact. So sociologists do these things called photo studies. They kind of creep around, they take photos of people interacting. We don't know they're doing it. And when they analyze them, there's a very clear pattern, which is that women talk face to face and men talk shoulder to shoulder. And the first time I heard that, I just had a far off stare. Oh, I could see it everywhere. It was like, I picture, the bar or the sporting event, or why I was so much more, when someone would say we should get together for coffee, I would feel a little bit uncomfortable, and I was never sure why. But if someone said, hey, do you want to come over and help me chop some firewood in my backyard, I'd be there at 6 a.m. right? Like it would. So it was a matter of, so that all ties into the fact that men bond over activity. It puts us in this shoulder to shoulder position. And I mean, if you think of your best friends, they're probably someone you went to school with or played a sport with or did, military service, all these classic bonding mechanisms. It's because you're bonding over an activity. You're relevant to each other. You're necessary. So, to make friends in the present, it was about like finding an activity, a way to be friends with your friends. And in the book, I started using this term. I called them velvet hooks. And the idea being that like you need to find this thing that will connect you that's sort of soft, not overly committed. I don't need another duty on my calendar, right? It's full enough already. But I wanted, and we know what these things are, right? They're the weekly sports team, the book club, whatever they might be. I don't know if you guys do fantasy football in your country. That's a big thing here in America. But like we know what these things are, and you got to kind of put in the effort and make them happen. It's it's weird to think about friendship as something that requires intent and effort because it happens so naturally for much of our life. But when you hit middle age, like, you need to work at your friendships. You need to make it something you devote time to and effort to. There's a vulnerability there, which is not a thing that men are taught to be comfortable with. You know, making yourself vulnerable to another guy. You just picture being in grade school and you're going to get trampled, right? But as an adult, every time I made myself vulnerable, it was reciprocated in the warmest possible way. And that's where the magic was.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say about intentionality, because that comes across again and again and again in the book. This notion of being intentional about what you're going to do and intentional about how you're going to set things up and how you're going to form these friendships. And it seemed to me that initially you kind of, when you were kind of deconstructing the mechanics of it, you started to do these different experiments where you were kind of right, okay, well, this is how it should work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, first of all, and you mentioned, you know, the Facebook school reunion, but the bit that kind of made me chuckle the most, and this is kind of an illustration as to how men and women interact in two different ways, is, can you tell us about how you managed to gate crash a New Kids on the Block cruise and what you learned from that?
So I'm still recovering from that emotionally. It's been a few years now, but so, you know, there was this thing I kept hearing initially when I set off on this journey. I just kept hearing as a fact that women are better at friendship than men. And I was trying to drill down on that because, I mean, you know, I don't think men were the only one who were lonely or suffering from this thing. And I also, I've been looking at women my whole life, right? Like, it's like, I think I know what they're doing, but I was curious to see what they did when men weren't around. Mm-hmm. But that was a conundrum, right? In American friendship culture, the thing that's held on a pedestal is this idea of the girls' trip. You just hear about, oh, when I go away with my girlfriends, like, that's our great bonding time. That's our magic. And so the idea was, can I go on a girls' trip with nobody noticing me? And what happened is I heard that the New Kids on the Block, which are, you know, like, were once a boy band, now they're all middle-aged dads, that they had some annual cruise, and that 4,000 women went on this cruise and no guys. And it was basically an opportunity to go on several hundred girls' trips at once. So I booked passage on the cruise ship. I got on, and immediately it was like, what am I doing here? And also, what is it I'm hoping to see? You know, it was kind of a dangerous experiment in the idea that I thought that if I just put on my monocle and stared at them as if I were, you know, Jane Goodall, right? That like some great revelation would come my way. And if there's anything I took away, it was that they just danced the whole time. And that was, you know, this is a chapter of the book where I talk about how these things that are kind of like magical for female friendship are so often thrown under this broad category of something that will get you shouted down as gay. And they're not, I mean, other than that being wildly insulting to gay people, they're not talking about your, you know, being attracted to the other guy. They're talking about you're acting feminine. And that word is thrown out as this dog whistle, this safe word, in the instances where we're doing it right. You know, that's the exact moment when we're being honest and open and emotional and vulnerable, and someone hits the eject button and we all go back up to the surface because that's not allowed for some reason. And the saddest part about that, when you drill into the science and the psychology, is that it's learned. Mm-hmm. It's a learned trait. It's not something innate to the male Homo sapien. Like, I mean, there are cultures around the world where that is not the case at all. But here in America, you know, you kind of put on these shoulder pads to get through adolescence because you just taught to pretend as if like deep, meaningful relationships with men are not something you need.
Yeah. And it's interesting because whenever you go, and I've talked about this before, and it's whenever you go to like a family get together or a wedding, and there's a DJ at the end of the night or a disco or whatever it's going to be. It's always the case that the guys are standing at the bar like, no, I'm not going to dance. No, I'm not going to dance. And then after a few beers, they're in the middle of the dance floor with their with their neckties around their head, like Mark Knopfler off Dire Straits trying to do air guitar. You know what I mean? But it takes a few beers before they can do that.
And you know it's often done. It seems like it's done as if they're like, I'm not actually having fun dancing. I'm making fun of the idea of dancing. You know, like I'm having a laugh at the expense of anyone who dare like this. You know, like, and yeah, I mean that's when I say it in the book. The only time men dance is like late at night at a wedding, right? And what happens at the end? It's the most fun part of the wedding, right? Like that's the part that you want to talk about down the line. It's but I mean, but what do I do with that, right? I leave the cruise and it's like, I can't, what? I'm going to invite a bunch of my buddies to go dancing together? Like, not going to happen, you know, like, and, you know, you bring up Robin Dunbar, he's written a lot about social grooming, and dancing is one of these things that's exclusive to humans as this way that social grooming is a term where we can bond with more people than the one-on-one bonding the primates would use, you know, grooming each other physically. We can bond with many people. We also do this with laughter. We do this with singing. Humans are the only animals that sing together. There are many animals that sing, but we're the only ones that can harmonize. But like laughter, sure, guys love that. You know, sitting around, farting around with the boys, like that's classic. That's allowed. But the idea of like, another thing I floated was starting a choir, and I mean, that went less than nowhere. Whatever less than nowhere would be. That's about how much interest my friends had when I throw the idea out there. Hey, did you know singing is this great bonding experience? And there's actually a few instances of successful, like, you know, guy choirs, like they call them beer choirs. But like that's another thing where, and that's a case where gay men in America do have choirs and probably have the time of their life, but they're not, you know, they're not being shouted down with that stupid word. You know, it's it is ruined so much. I have an 11-year-old son, and he's about to get in that phase where I know like this is gonna come up, that word or whatever the word, you know, just whatever the word might be. It's the same thing that is being policed because why? Like, I don't know. There's no answer to the why other than they learned it from someone who learned it, from someone who learned it. And it all goes back to what? Like some 1950s, like post-war ideal of like this stiff upper lip and, you know, like this tough guy who doesn't need friends, doesn't, you know, like just takes care of themselves, this tough guy thing. Like those tough guys die lonely, I think. You know, like, I mean, there's this romanticism with like the sort of noble loner. Like that's a myth. Like the loner is lonely.
Yeah, and I talk about this, funny enough, a lot with the guys who follow Guild of Dads and what I call the lone wolf fallacy. When, you know, it's a James Bond character, it's the Indiana Jones character that are kind of acting by themselves, and it's like you say, it's a stiff upper lip where I don't need any help from anyone. I can do it all myself. But in actual fact, talking to a lot of special forces guys, ex-military guys, you know, all of the people that I've interviewed all say that men need to refine their tribes and they need to have like a tight-knit group around them. Even like special forces units, they still operate in teams of 4 or 5 guys who each have each other's backs, and they're in tight little kind of units. And I think in the ancient times, I think they knew that, but I think we've kind of forgotten that. And even down to the last probably, because like, for instance, I can remember my old man going to Round Table, and you had Rotary clubs, and you had different, and you probably had Masonic lodges and different society. There was loads of different sort of groups for men, which seem to have kind of, I won't say they died a death, but they're not as probably popular as they once were in, say, the 70s and 80s sort of thing. But it's kind of left like a gap. There's almost like a gap where guys are like, oh, hang on a minute, so we're going to go inside our houses and we're going to switch on our TV sets and we're going to surf the internet and oh, hang on a minute, did we need to actually be around other guys? Oh yeah, Chip, we do need to be around other guys at the same time as guys are getting depression, anxiety, mental health issues, suicide rates in middle age, you know, all these kind of things that come to a perfect storm when a lot of the time this stuff is kind of staring us in the face what we should be doing. Instinctively we know what we should be doing, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, in ancient times, I don't think loneliness wasn't even an option. You probably saw the same 150 people all day, every day, right? Like you were never alone. We had, we kept our elders in the house with us. All these things that have just become, washed away by, I guess, the idea of progress. And it's like you bring up the special forces. There's a great book by Sebastian Junger called Tribe, which starts. He was a war correspondent and comes home from war and is suffering from all these, the after effects, and realized he was happier in war. And it was because he was basically embedded with these units and he felt necessary and connected and all that. And when he left, he felt the opposite. And looking into it, he realizes that so much of PTSD and all these symptoms after people serve was because they lost their tribe, and it's good when you hear of people who are staying connected and thriving off of that simple idea of having a squad, and I mean, ultimately the best thing I did, that being sort of dropped into this issue I didn't want to raise my hand and admit to, and then coming out the other side, was I now have like 4 or 5 new best friends in my community, and we text all day long, and they it feels like it in a there's this question of why do we need friends, because you can make the argument that right now you don't need anyone in the modern world. Like, I mean, I can have all my food delivered to my door, I can work remotely, but there's the general idea is you want someone that you feel like will have your back when it hits the fan. And the arrival of COVID, it felt like it for the first time in my life. I mean, it was like, do I need to go into the woods with a knife and come back with my dinner, right? Like, is the world about to shut down? And I felt like that at the very beginning of lockdowns last March, that like every tribe I'd ever been a part of was kind of reconnecting in a way. Like the group text started, maybe we should do the Zoom. And it was like, I mean, these are some were tribes I haven't had anything to do with in forever. And I think it was that natural human feeling that, we do need people. We do need these connections and these crews. And I've been doing, a lot of interviews, and a lot of people asking like, what happens after COVID? And I mean, I don't know, but I think if anything, I hope it's one of these like absence makes the heart grow fonder situations where we realize we were taking for granted the fact, that we could connect with our friends, we just weren't. And now that's been taken away from us, I hope that we are about to enter a new golden age of friendship. I mean, I'm a wildly naive person in general, but I hope that in this case, I that it leads to something. I mean, we've all been taught a lesson, and let's hope we come out of it where we realize, I mean, friendship isn't just something you do after the important stuff is done. Friendships, it's the magic in life, right? Like, I mean, I'm fortunate to have a great family, but that broader social connection, getting together with friends. I mean, my kids are, remote learning right now. I just see the craving in their eyes. They just need it so much, and it's so vital to them. And, fingers crossed that the light at the end of the tunnel is closer than it's ever been for this thing. But I really hope that when we come out of this, it's just a new golden era of social connections instead of what it's been, which is this dive. And America and England, these two, countries that seem to have it all, have been leading that dive, and I think, we've been misinformed by the misinformed for too long. We're chasing, financial success, or, the whatever it is, a career, all these other things. At the end of the day, the people that are having the best time are the ones that are just hanging out with their friends around the fire at the end of the night. It's hopefully that simple.
Yeah, I think there's going to be epiphany of sorts, because I think that you're right. I mean, I looked on my phone the other day, and people sort of, the amount of messaging apps there is on the phone now. You've got Messenger over here. We use WhatsApp quite a lot. Then you've got, then you've got email. Then you've got text. So there's most people have probably got about 4 or 5 different messaging apps. And I said to my wife, I said, actually, if they just had one app that brings all of this stuff into, they probably already invented it. I don't know about it, but that brought all this information in one place, that you can just open it in one place. But it's a kind of weird time that we're living in, because like it's like sort of, all of these labor saving devices were invented to save time. And then what the human race did was just spend more time wasting time on stuff that actually is of no significance whatsoever. And now we find ourselves in a situation where we've spent all this time wasting time on stuff that actually doesn't actually nourish or make our lives any better. And then gone into a pandemic and we're like, actually, I just want to man hug someone. I just want to put my arm around someone and or pat them on the back of the shoulder and stuff. And all of these, and I was talking to previous guests on this, and just in terms of kind of what people have missed during lockdown. And I said to him, in actual fact, what's interesting is that in the Gary Chapman's Love Languages book, one of the main love languages for men, predominantly for men, is physical touch or being tactile. And I said to him, I think that's what a lot of guys are actually missing more than anything else. Not making out with their best mate, but what I mean is this actual kind of, having a handshake, having a side hug, putting the hand on their back if they're having a rough day or a bad time of it, or and I think that's what people have really missed in this last little period. Just that, the subtle tactileness of human connection. You know what I mean?
Oh, I mean, I had an experience on Saturday. It's Monday now, where a guy went to shake my hand, and we were surfing. We were standing on the beach, so we're wearing like thick winter wetsuits and all that. And I like shook his hand because we're wearing 7 millimeters of neoprene. And then we both talked about how weird it was to shake hands with. Like, it just felt so foreign. And like that tactile guy stuff, I mean, like just like roughhousing, just, shoving your buddy, a little nut tap, like whatever it might be. I miss like the simple things, like driving in a car with someone, like being able to like, I'll pick you up. And, sometimes, a car, classic shoulder to shoulder opportunity, right? Like so often it's those in between places, right? Where he might be picking me up to go do this thing, but it's in the car ride where the bonding happens, right? Or often the car ride home, it's, I don't know, like there's a lot of missing, and sometimes I don't realize how much I'm missing it until some guy sticks out his hand to shake my hand, and I'm like, is this allowed? Oh my gosh. Like, I keep having these weird feelings where I'll be watching like a movie, and they'll show a bunch of people at a concert, and I just feel weirdly uncomfortable. It's like, I forgot that that's how life used to be. You could crowd in with tens of thousands of strangers. And I wonder how long that's going to feel weird on the other side of this. But like being together, like I mean, and I will say, like, solitude and loneliness are very different. And so I think a lot of people, when they hear about this topic in general, like to go, I love being alone. It's like, I'm not cheapening that or taking that away from you. Like I got 2 kids that never leave this house, right? They're in school. Believe me, I like my alone time, but I'm looking forward to being together more than anything.
Yeah. Because you can be, and this is an interesting notion of being physically in the presence of people, because like people go, oh, how can you be lonely? Because you're in a house, or you're surrounded by people, or you're at work, and this is the thing with large scale societies. You can be physically surrounded by people but still be mentally alone because you've not got anyone to talk to about what is happening, be it good, bad, or indifferent. And this,
I think there's this idea like lonely. We picture some recluse living in the woods by himself, and it's like not true. If you look at the data, I mean, the average person is what a lonely researcher would rate as high loneliness. Like, and that's based on how you answer simple questions like, how many confidants do you have? If you were sad in the middle of the night, is there anyone you could call? Most people are lucky enough to have a spouse that answers that sort of the core question, but you need connections outside of the household. So loneliness, and also like, it's not like a competition. Like, you don't have to be, clinically lonely, like in need of care to tackle this issue within yourself, or to be aware of it. And so, I mean, it feels like the time for this topic. When I first dipped my toe in it, like I don't think I'd given it much thought. I certainly was not aware that I was swept up in a epidemic. But that was 4 years ago when I first wrote that article. It seems like it's just coming up. It's coming up. It's coming up. It feels like what depression was a couple decades ago. You know, it was something people didn't talk about, and now it's something people are comfortable being open with. They're comfortable admitting that they need a little help, or even better, comfortable admitting that they got help and it was transformative. And this is a case where I think it's the same thing. People admitting they needed a little kickstart help in their friendship life, and what it's done for them. And I'm like living proof. I mean, I was a guy that didn't know he was lonely, found out that I was inarguably lonely. And after doing some work, I'm now like, I mean, it's like, as I'm talking to you, there's like text popping up on this other screen all like constantly. And I mean, good problem to have, right? Like I mean, it's endless. But I mean, this is a phrase I hear on like, you know, sort of like an Oprah type podcast, but like, I'm in a really good place. Like, I don't know how else to put it, but like, I'm in a really good place. And what did I change about myself? Nothing, other than I have some guys to fart around with on a Wednesday night. And I mean, during COVID, so I basically, the outcome of this book was I started what was more or less like a Wednesday night fraternity. And during COVID, that has turned into a gathering of guys where it's like, how big can we build a backyard bonfire before someone calls the police, right? Like, so we found a way through it. And that camaraderie of the campfire, it's very primal, it's very ancient. And I'll come home, you know, I'll be in a good mood. My wife will ask, what did you do? And I'll be like, I don't even know. I don't, like, we haven't forgotten how to be juvenile. We hung out, we told some funny stories, you know, and at the end of the night, I feel better. I wake up the next morning, I feel better. It makes me a better employee and a better dad and a better husband, all these things, because like, you know, I had some time with the fellas. And am I like, is my physical health better? I don't know. I don't know how I would have measured that, but I feel like I'm doing all right. I'm 44 years old and the wheels haven't come off just yet. So, I mean, it's the craziest thing in the world to say, but like, if you don't want to see the doctor, see your friends.
Yeah.
Blows my mind.
Just,
but it's
just hanging. And then and then your wife says to you, so hang on a minute. So how's Steve's wife? And then you say, me and Steve didn't talk about his wife. So what about what about her car? Wasn't her car? Didn't she have a problem with her car the other week? No, me and Steve didn't really talk about that one. So what did you talk about? Just guy stuff.
I got an email today from someone who said I just read the book because my wife heard me on the radio show, heard me talking on a radio show, and said that exact thing. She's like, you always go out with your friend and I come home and ask all these things like, how's this important issue in their life? And you go, I don't know. Like it didn't come up, but that's okay. Right. Like, I think that, you know, like, I think there's this idea that like, you know, a weakness in male friendship is that we might not go to these deep places, but like, that's not what I'm not advocating. Like, let's all get together and sit around and talk about our feelings. Like that's, you know, that comes up. Sometimes it comes, and it's great when it comes up naturally. Maybe it takes a couple cans of courage. You've had a few beers and that's when it comes up. But like the idea, I think it's, you know, why, like, yeah, I never wanted to get together and have coffee. I don't want to sit around and like talk about our feelings, but you know, if you want to like hang out around the campfire and like, we went through a terrible phase where we were burning furniture just because like you see people will put like furniture on the side of the road. And at one point we started with a desk and oh my gosh, this furniture burn. Like I mean, we're probably all dying of lung cancer at this moment from the old varnish and whatnot, but like, I mean, every guy in my crew is in their 40s or 50s. And like, it's just a gong show. It is nonsense, and we have the best time. And like that, I don't know. It just took a little bit of effort. And the people that have really like started participating in this group, participating by simply just showing up, I think they'll all say to a person like, it's been a great thing for them, and they can't quite put their finger on why, other than some blank is no longer blank.
Yeah, yeah, and I like what I liked as well. The flavour I got of your book as you went through the kind of experiments. It was very kind of methodical to begin with, and looking for a deliberate outcome. And when people didn't show up or they were flaky or whatever, it was kind of like maybe I'm doing something wrong here. But it seemed to me like there was a realization as you got towards the end that there was that you needed to be deliberate, but that you needed to allow the outcome to become a little bit more organic rather than actually manufactured. And that is kind of where the kind of gold dust all of a sudden happened, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it's exactly what happened. I was kind of staging. I was being the party planner at the beginning, and then at the end, I threw the party, and then it didn't have a theme. It was, and that also backfired in some ways. So I ended up starting this Wednesday night group. Basically, invite a dozen guys that I knew, some well, some hardly at all. I just felt some sort of connection with them. And we started off hot. Everyone loved the idea. I got them all together. This guy let us use his barn. It was this like classic setting. And, we got together. I confessed my whole story, this journey I've been on, said, I like you. I think you like me. Let's form a little club. It went great. And then it went a little less great. And then it got a little bit like, so even to go back to that, it was like, we're just going to get together in this barn and talk about our feelings. So it kind of ran its course. And so I think we were feeling like we needed some sort of purpose. And ultimately, I think I'd abandoned the very first lesson I learned in all this, which is that guys need some sort of activity. And once we came up with it, like one guy said, we should build a BMX track. And it was like, oh, great. All right, we'll be the guys that build a BMX track. We haven't built a BMX track. We haven't put a shovel in the dirt yet, but we do talk about it all the time. And now it's like we're guys who light things on fire. And we've also been playing pickleball, which, do you know what this is? Pickleball?
No.
It's like it's halfway between table tennis and regular tennis, and that's the easiest way I could describe it. It's like something that like our seniors do, and now we're doing it, and it's hilarious. It's just like guys just yelling at each other. We're all terrible at it because I don't think you can actually be good at it. Like it doesn't have the sort of finesse that either tennis or ping pong would have. But yeah, now like some Wednesday nights we're getting together at like a gym my buddy owns and setting up this little net with these wooden paddles and like little plastic balls, and like I don't know. These are these little velvet hooks. Like, do I go there to play pickleball? No, I go there to like play around with my friends, and what we're doing is playing pickleball. And
then on Thursday you go to the chiropractor for like a joint session with all four of you.
Oh, you're not kidding. Like I there's a foam roller over here just because like for that very reason. I'm having IT band issues. I didn't even know I had an IT band, but pickleball is exacerbated it.
One of the things that I liked about your book, and I'm going to sort of jump to something completely different now, is one of the things that kind of struck me in the last little while is that we can be dads, because I know you've got your own kids anyway. We can be dads to our own kids, but there's also a role as fathers that we play to kids that we may not even know, or kids that are in our kind of community, or that have kind of come into our lives. And you talk quite fondly in the book about George and Johnny, who you first kind of met when you were doing some I think it was some outreach project that you were doing.
It was a journalism project.
That's it. Yeah. And I just wonder whether what it's been like being part of, because they were Vietnamese immigrants, and I don't know whether their dad was their dad around or not around, or there was.
He had just taken his own life, just before I met them. So yeah. So what had happened with George and Johnny was I was working, in my day job at the Boston Globe. We were doing a series on this bus line that went through sort of the rougher neighborhoods in Boston. Mm-hmm. The communities where struggle is a part of daily life. And after a certain point, it was just like, this guilt you feel like, it's not all bad news here. Like let's end this series on a good note. And so I went hunting for a good story, and I found a great one, which were these two brothers who had like the worst everything that could go wrong in their home life was going wrong. Their dad had just taken his own life. Their mother had mental illness. They were Vietnamese boat people, basically the people who fought in Vietnam alongside the United States. And then when we choppered out and left them behind, they got put into prison camps, like they had to like flee their country. Awful, awful stuff. And then they come to America, settle in Boston. It's freezing cold. They're dealing with racism and, they every problem in the world. But they have these two boys. When I met them, they were 14 and 15. And they were like the best students in Boston. Like they were like at the top of their class. So I rode this bus line with them to kind of document how their story. And we connected. I was probably, early 30s at the time, and they were teenagers. And when you're approaching someone as a journalist, you have to just let the movie play in front of you. You can't intervene in any way, even though like, the human in me wanted to reach in his pocket and pull out a few dollars when, they didn't have any or whatever it might be. But I let it play out, wrote the article, got a tremendous response. A lot of people were really inspired by George and Johnny. But then when it was over, it was like, well, I don't need to follow the rules of journalism anymore. I can now follow the rules of being a good human. And we already had a connection. So it was like, all right, like, I kind of became the father figure in a way, like in those things that I just took for granted, like I taught them how to drive a car, I talked to them about women, and like, their first dates and helped them with their university applications and, Christmas gifts and birthday gifts and things that like just weren't like that they appreciated, and they, if anything, their story starting out was of two kids who like, got it done with no parent. And I was like, if my mother didn't scream at me to get out of bed in the morning, I would have been late for school every day of my life. Right. Like and so in some ways they didn't need me, but, and I don't want to take too much credit for their success or any credit, but the role I came to play, and I write about this in the book, and they were really like, they didn't read the book or anything beforehand, but when it came out, they were like, that's exactly what it was. There's been this long running study by Harvard University where they followed a graduating class. And then I can't even remember how long, like John F. Kennedy, our president, was part of this initial group. And then they followed their descendants and whatnot. And it's become a longitudinal study. And one of the things it's used for is to mine the sources of happiness, things that actually make you happy and successful in life, successful in your happiness. And one of the biggest predictors was people who had the answer to the question, do you have someone to call in the middle of the night if you're sick or afraid? And I became their phone call. As simple as that is, I became their phone call. And something about that allowed them to flourish. They could take risks when they were away at school, maybe, if they had a run-in with the police or a fake ID or something like that, like that, they knew Uncle Billy is what they call me, that I'd drive in and do what a dad might do in that moment, and so like that sort of thing. I've written about them several times now, and every time I do, it has a huge response, and it often is a response from people who are either mentors, talking about how fulfilling that has been for them. It's a very selfish thing to be a mentor. It makes you feel good. You do it for someone else, but it's amazing how good it feels. And then I'd hear from a lot of people who are like, I had a mentor. I was the kid from the struggling neighborhood, and I got connected with this person, or he was a coach that kind of became a father, whatever it might be. And how that was what I needed. That was the safety net underneath. And so, yeah, that is probably the most meaningful relationship I had, active relationship I had prior to going on this journey. And when I sort of examined, like, why was I so good about being having a stick-to-itiveness with that friendship, but I wasn't calling my regular friends on the regular. And it was because that had some stakes. There were some potential consequences if they fell through the cracks, or if my mentorship fell through the cracks. And so, it was that dual reward in that feeling of being their phone call and knowing that they believe that, and they've used that phone call. it gave them the safety net to the point where now they're in their mid 20s, and I rarely hear from them. I feel like the neglected parent, where I'm like, call your uncle sometime, like I'm sending them the text message, and they both have great jobs, they're flourishing, they have girlfriends, they're saving money, they're doing all these responsible things that I was not doing when I was their age. But it's that simple. And like, I wonder if I'm now ready for my next George and Johnny. Like I'm a privileged man, and I have a little to give, and I wonder if it's time, because I mean, I think it's the sort of thing that's scary to think about taking on, but like the rewards are like, it's ridiculous, and people like laud me as if I'm like I've done it. I'm like, bro, these were good kids who just needed the tiniest little thing, right? And what did they need? They needed a friend that they could count on, and filling that role. It's been one of the best things that's ever happened to me.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to. I couldn't let this conversation go without just at least touching on that and hearing what you had to say. And I can see how much it kind of lights you up when you're talking about it as well. So I love it. I really do love it. Well, hey, before we wrap up, could I ask you, how is your friend life? How are you doing?
How is my friend life?
I would say that I have kind of lost touch with a lot of the people that I went to school with, and kind of actually probably some of them didn't want to be in touch with them. But I think that I found that we made a lot more friends when the kids were young, and my wife was a lot more kind of plugged into it, just simply because there's more mum and baby groups and that kind of stuff, and antenatal groups and all this kind of stuff. I think it's harder for dads. So I found it harder to kind of make new friends off the back of that. But I think certainly through school and that kind of stuff, I've made new friends, and I still have older friends that I see, and we live in a different area and stuff and that. And we meet up periodically. But your book is exactly, and it has given me some food for thought in terms of where I go from kind of here, if that makes any sense, because I am exactly as you described at the beginning of your book, definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatable. I mean, I'm going to hold up the book here. It's titled "We Need to Hang Out," and the idea was like, I just thought of it being that sort of book that sometimes it's a little awkward to say to someone like, I want to be more than just mates. I saw a comedian the other day do this bit where he said that dads don't have friends, moms have friends, and those friends have husbands. Like, and so sometimes it feels that way, but like if you don't have someone to hang out with on a Wednesday night, then you got to find someone. You got to make it happen, and they're probably right in front of you. So just put in the effort, because you know what? They probably need this too. And I think that one of the beauties of hitting middle age is that you're old enough to be honest, and you kind of let the cool guy stuff die a little bit. So you reach out and you will be rewarded.
You're going to hold me to this now, Billy, you see.
I am, yeah. I mean, and
You're going to keep texting me now.
Like, the best thing about writing this book is hearing from people that like, I read it, I liked it, I reached out to whoever, and now where we've decided we're gonna join a bowling league on Wednesday night. It's like, that's amazing, right? That's all it takes, and then who knows what happens next.
Yeah. So if people want to find out about you, link up with you, ping you a message, what's the best way for them to do so, Billy?
So, I'm a Boston Globe reporter. So my Boston Globe email is billybaker@globe.com. Mm-hmm. I write a lot of humor pieces there. If you're happen to be a reader of the Boston Globe, I'm churning out content there. But, this book is, it was a privilege to, like, in a weird way, it didn't exist. I can't think of another book that was just about male friendship. And a lot of people have asked, like, why didn't you write about female friendship? Or it was like, there's like a whole section of the bookstore devoted to this. It's just now that men are kind of feeling free to talk about these things. I'm glad I'm the, typical guy that everyone can relate to. But other than that, I have nothing to plug other than as soon as you're done listening to this, hang up and call your buddy, call your mates, call the guy you just met that you kind of feel like you could be friends with. It's only going to lead good places.
I love it. And I'm going to ask you one last question that I don't prime any of my guests for. And that question, Billy, is what is it in life that gives you meaning?
Um, I I don't know. I mean, the first answer I want to say is being a dad. It really is. Every sappy cliche that I heard before becoming a dad has turned out to be true. But I think my life is about chasing little sparks of joy, and I'm kind of conscious about that. So like, meaning for me is going to those places. Sometimes it's an activity, sometimes it's a friend, sometimes it's a something I want to learn, sometimes it's something I want to impart on someone else. But like those little bits of joy, which are always occur in those moments where I'm drilled down right in that moment. I'm not thinking about something in the future or something in the past. Like that's meaning for me. And so, you know, when we hang up the phone or hang up the Zoom, like my boys want me to take them into the woods behind our house and see if we can find deer antlers. This is the time of the year when they shed their antlers, and it's like that is going to lead to such a little spark of joy, just being out there doing nothing except staring at the white snow, trying to find something white. That's my life. It's just bridges between those moments.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Billy, thank you very much for coming and speaking to me today. It's been an absolute pleasure finding out about the experience that you've been on, and you know the story that you've got to tell. I would recommend anyone listening or watching to check out Billy's book, which is entitled "We Need to Hang Out," and it's his memoirs of the journey that he's been on. Thank you very much, sir, for today, and I appreciate the work that you're doing and the awareness that you're bringing to this much-needed space in men's lives right now, sir.
Well, thanks for having me. You're an awesome host. I enjoyed this.
Thanks very much. Cheers, Billy.
Bye-bye now.
Cheers, man.